trade with China is still strong. We're still awaiting the details of the China trade agreement, so we don't know how that's going to impact trade going forward. August 12th is the deadline for the current China trade deal. It is not expected that anything will happen on August 12th. The administration said that they're willing to continue to have discussions and negotiate beyond August 12th, so that's good news, I guess. Hello, today is August 8th, 2025. Welcome to Simply Trade, Cindy's version. Anik from Simply Trade has dubbed me the Taylor Swift of trade, so I have just completely embraced that. So this podcast is centered around a Taylor Swift song, and today we're choosing Cruel Summer. Specifically, the lyrics that go, "I'm drunk in the back of the car because, right now we all need some libations. I cried like a baby coming home from the bar, like we all do from work. And I said I'm fine, but it wasn't true." And I think everyone feels that way. I think we're all glad it's Friday, August 8th, and we have gotten through one of the roughest weeks in trade so far. And that's saying something because it's been a very eventful 8 months. So what's going on with trade this week? The tariffs have taken effect for over 90 countries. That means additional tariff rates that have gone up for the EU. This has been a particularly challenging implementation for the EU because there is a maximum of 15%. So what does that mean? If you have a MFNs or a most favored nation tariff rate that is under 15%, you have to charge that. But then you also have to make up the difference of that tariff in the reciprocal tariff to equal 15%. So if your MFN is 5%, the reciprocal is 10%. So that is really challenging for calculating, especially in an automated environment and for customs brokers and importers who are just trying to figure out how much duty I'm going to have to pay. And also, we're challenged with some of the specific tariff rates. How do I charge when it's by liter or by weight? What does that look like? What does that mean for the tariff rates? So it's been very challenging for goods from the EU overall, especially for customs brokers. So my heart and minds go out to the customs brokers trying to figure out how to do this. Customs did yesterday come out with some additional information. It was published by the NCBFAA on how to specifically transmit the information. If your tariff rate is over 15%, the MFN, that means the reciprocal caps it at 15%. And that means you just send the reciprocal tariff. So very complicated. If you are importing from the EU, I would suggest you reach out to your customs brokers, reach out to your ABI vendors, and understand how that information is being transmitted. And by the way, remember, ACE doesn't have edit checks for all of the duty calculations. So you want to make sure that you're pulling some of those entries, working with a good consultant, and making sure that you have checks and balances in place to double check some of those calculations. Copper tariffs details came out. We are not seeing duties on the raw materials, which is good news for a lot of U.S. manufacturers. And there was an announcement that semiconductors might have a 100% tariff rate, except if you're already building a manufacturing capacity in the U.S. or you intend to build a manufacturing capacity for semiconductors or their uses in the U.S., then you might be exempt. We aren't sure. There were statements made about pharmaceuticals, the 232 on that, what that's going to look like. And again, the statement was they might be low in the beginning, but they're going to continue to go high, which is concerning because India is at a 50% right now due to some of the trade talks breaking down. And that was also announced this week. What does that look like? Well, a lot of pharmaceuticals, especially the generics, are imported from India. So we do expect to see a price pressure on pharmaceutical prices going forward. What does that look like when you combine it with the 232? It's concerning moving forward. So if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, I know you're knee deep in that. You need to have some conversations, work with your government affairs folks, and reach out and see if you can continue to educate your lawmakers on how this is going to impact your companies, your constituents, your employees, and understand how overall it's going to impact the economy, which is going to be a big hit. Trade stats are in. China trade is still up despite the de minimis going away in May. The preliminary trade statistics show that China trade is strong as ever, even though there were fluctuations based on when the tariffs came on, when the tariffs came off, when de minimis was done, when it wasn't, when it came back on. All of that had some trade fluctuations over the course of the past several months, but overall, trade with China is still strong. We're still awaiting the details of the China trade agreement, so we don't know how that's going to impact trade going forward. But we do know that there was a comment in a news interview that August 12th is the deadline for the current China trade deal. It is not expected that anything will happen on August 12th. The administration said that they're willing to continue to have discussions and negotiate beyond August 12th. So that's good news, I guess, for those importing from China, because at least we know right now what the tariff rates are. Tariff rates, in the future, it's hard to plan for it, but as companies are moving into the ordering and the start of the peak season for Christmas season, I think that's a little bit of a good news, because now we know we can have at least some little bit of predictability on what the tariff rates are going to be. Speaking of tariff rates, Howard Lutnick yesterday in an interview talked about the term transshipment. When asked by an interviewer what the term transshipment meant and what 40% would apply to, Lutnick did outline a concept that we all thought in the trade was where they were going, where the administration was going with the term transshipment. And that wasn't necessarily to mean illegal transshipment, where a good comes from China, goes to Vietnam. They relabel that product and declare it as Vietnamese after not having any type of processing or product addition there. That is illegal transshipment. What we all thought in the transshipment, in the language of the tariffs, that the transshipment meant was probably a component level requirement for those products to qualify for that new country of origin. And Lutnick did outline that in an interview, I believe, with Fox News yesterday. And he talked about how China was sending goods into Vietnam. They were undergoing a manufacturing process and then being claimed as Vietnam. And they thought that was disingenuous, even though that's a common trade practice in the United States and all over the world globally. When you substantially transform something, that has been the definition of country of origin moving forward. So the fact that they are looking at a component level requirement now is concerning. Lutnick did outline, if you're bringing that good in from China and you're doing some sort of processing in Vietnam, there should be a minimum component level of product made in Vietnam. So he threw out 20 to 30% could only come from outside countries. So that means that 7 to 80% of the value in the components have to be added in the new country of origin to qualify for the lower duty rate. Otherwise, it would qualify for the 40% moving forward. So a couple of different comments on that. One, I've gotten a lot of calls in the last week about, hey, how can we just pay the 40% transshipment coming into Vietnam? Because if we bring it directly in from China, our duty rate is 75, 80% with all of the stacking duties. Can we just pay the 40% tariff rate on the transshipment? So not exactly, I believe, what the administration intended. So we are counseling those folks. No, that's not the intent here. The intent is to declare the country of origin properly. That does speak to the fact that companies, again, are going to have to understand where their raw materials are coming from. Not just, hey, this underwent a substantial transformation in this last iteration of production, and that is the country of origin. You're going to have to understand all of the different processes in the value, not just components, but the manufacturing value, the overhead, the labor that went into that process in every specific country coming in. And that's going to be difficult. Most trade partners don't understand that, especially small to medium-sized importers. So if you are importing, you may want to start looking at capabilities and service offerings to understand where your products are coming from. You may want to start talking about contracting terms. Does my contract allow me to ask my suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers where those products came from, and how can I gather all of that information? So technology is going to be your friend here, especially some of the newer technologies and the AI that are coming out with AI and analytic capabilities. You will want to start having those conversations with those suppliers now. In the realm of technology, CBP announced that a GBI pilot, a GBI qualifier to qualify who these companies are, have been accepted from Altana. They joined Dun & Bradstreet as a entity level verification process. So we have a different and alternative supplier other than Dun & Bradstreet. And Customs is also looking at additional uses. Why are they looking at additional uses for that information? Well, because they're going to have to enforce these component level tariffs. I think we all in the trade were kind of bracing for component level requirements. I think they will come out in the future based on Lutnick's comments, based on some of the other discussions that are going on, and based on some of the capabilities that CBP is now pursuing outside of ACE. As I've said before, ACE is going to be the base type of technology, and Customs is going to continue to bolt on outside products or off-the-shelf products. That's what they used to call them, COTS, commercially off-the-shelf products, and be able to bring those and link those into the ACE capability. So we may not see CBP develop ACE any further, but what we are seeing is them acquire different technologies to bolt onto ACE to give them additional analytics and capabilities. So if you're out there and you're looking at what's next for technology, that's what's next. And if you are able to, you may want to look at providers who can supplement the information that you have, because there may be a requirement that you understand that in the very near future. And I'll wrap up today by saying the manufacturing indexes that I follow continue to be down. We're seeing an impact on GDP again that continues. Although the market, Wall Street, continues to go up, some of the manufacturing indexes continue to fall, which does speak directly to the tariffs and their impacts on the economy today. So we'll continue to watch those for you and wrap up again. Welcome to the cruel summer, and I hope you have a great weekend and a great week, and we'll talk to you next Friday.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.